My parents took my college fund from my brother. 4 years later I bought their house. I remember the exact moment my world fell apart. It was a humid Saturday afternoon in June 2019, 3 months before I was supposed to start at the University of Michigan. I was 17 years old, sitting at our kitchen table in our suburban Detroit home, surrounded by college brochures and financial aid documents. The acceptance letter from U of M sat proudly on the refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like the state of Michigan. I had worked 4 years for that letter, maintaining a 3.8 GPA, volunteering at the local hospital, serving as treasurer of the student council. That letter represented everything I had sacrificed and achieved. My parents called a family meeting that afternoon, which should have been my first warning sign. My father sat at the head of the table, his hands folded in front of him, wearing the expression he reserved for serious conversations. My mother sat beside him, her eyes red and puffy, clearly having been crying. My older brother Ryan sat across from me, 21 years old, his face blank and unreadable. The air conditioning hummed in the background, but the room felt suffocatingly hot. My father cleared his throat and began to speak. He told me that Ryan had been accepted into a prestigious MBA program at Northwestern University in Chicago. The program cost $80,000 for 2 years, and Ryan had been offered only partial financial aid. My father explained that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, that an MBA from Northwestern would set Ryan up for an incredible career in business. Then came the words that would echo in my mind for years to come. They had decided to use my college fund to pay for Ryan's graduate school. The college fund had been started when I was born, carefully built over 17 years through contributions from my parents, grandparents, and even small deposits I had made from birthday money and part-time jobs. It contained $43,000, enough to cover most of my tuition at U of M for 4 years when combined with the financial aid I had been offered. Without it, I would need to take out massive student loans or find another way to pay for school. I sat there in stunned silence as my father continued talking, his words washing over me like waves I couldn't quite process. He said they would help me apply for more scholarships, that I could take out loans like many other students, that this was what families did for each other. My mother reached across the table to hold my hand, tears streaming down her face, telling me she was sorry but that Ryan needed this more than I did. He had struggled in his undergraduate years, barely graduating with a 2.5 GPA, and this MBA program was his chance to turn his life around. I looked at Ryan, waiting for him to say something, to protest, to tell our parents this wasn't fair. But he just sat there, avoiding my eyes, his jaw set in that stubborn way that meant he had already made peace with this decision. In that moment I realized he had known about this for a while, probably weeks or even months. They had all discussed this without me, made this life-altering decision about my future without even asking for my input. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had ever experienced. This wasn't just about money, it was about what that money represented. My parents had always told me that education was the path to success, that hard work would be rewarded, that they would support my dreams. I had believed them. I had spent 4 years working my tail off in high school, sacrificing social activities to study, taking on extra shifts at my part-time job at the bookstore to save money. I had done everything right, followed every rule, met every expectation. And now, when it mattered most, they were telling me none of that was enough. The reasoning they gave made it worse. Ryan needed it more because he had struggled? Because he had partied his way through college and barely graduated? I was being punished for my success, penalized for being responsible and hardworking. The message was clear. In our family, failure was rewarded and success was taken for granted. The squeaky wheel got the grease, and I had been too quiet, too self-sufficient, too easy. I left the table without saying a word. I went to my bedroom, packed a backpack with some clothes and my laptop, and walked out of the house. My mother called after me, but I didn't turn around. I spent that night at my best friend Jessica's house, lying on her basement couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Jessica's parents were kind enough not to ask too many questions, but I could see the concern in their eyes. The next few days were a blur of anger, grief, and desperate problem-solving. I returned home eventually. I had nowhere else to go, but the house felt different now, tainted by betrayal. I couldn't look at my parents without feeling a mixture of hurt and rage. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, speaking only when necessary, spending most of my time in my bedroom researching alternatives. I called the financial aid office at U of M and explained my situation. They were sympathetic but clear. Without my college fund, I would need to take out approximately $35,000 in loans per year to cover tuition, room, and board. By the time I graduated, I would be over $140,000 in debt. The weight of that number felt crushing, impossible. I had watched my parents struggle with debt my entire childhood, seen how it limited their choices and caused stress. The thought of starting my adult life buried under that kind of financial burden made me physically sick. I considered community college, considered taking a gap year to work and save money, considered giving up on college altogether. But every option felt like a consolation prize, a lesser version of the future I had worked so hard to build. The resentment grew inside me like a living thing, feeding on every interaction with my family, every time I saw Ryan's Northwestern acceptance letter on the refrigerator next to mine. I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going to U of M and drowning in debt, I would take a gap year, but not the kind where you travel Europe or find yourself. I would work, save every penny and find another path forward. My parents were relieved, I think, that I wasn't causing more conflict. They probably expected me to cool down, to eventually accept their decision and thank them for teaching me resilience. But something had hardened inside me during those weeks after the betrayal. I wasn't interested in their approval anymore. I moved out 2 weeks after my 18th birthday in July 2019. I found a tiny studio apartment in a rough neighborhood in Detroit, a 4th-floor walk-up with peeling paint and a radiator that clanked all night. The rent was $550 a month, cheap enough that I could afford it on the wages from 2 jobs. I worked mornings at a coffee shop near downtown, making lattes for business professionals rushing to their offices. In the afternoons and evenings, I worked at a tech startup doing data entry and basic administrative tasks. Between both jobs, I was pulling 60-hour weeks, sometimes more. The apartment was depressing at first. I had a mattress on the floor, a folding table I had bought at a thrift store, and a single chair. My clothes hung in a corner because the closet door was broken. The building was loud, neighbors arguing, music playing at all hours, sirens wailing past on the street below. But it was mine. Nobody could take it away from me. Nobody could make decisions about my future without my consent. That independence, as lonely and difficult as it was, felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. My parents tried to stay in contact those first few months. My mother would call every week asking how I was doing, if I needed anything, telling me about Ryan's preparations for Northwestern. I kept the conversations short and polite. My father sent texts occasionally, usually about practical matters, making sure I had renewed my car insurance, reminding me to file my taxes. They never acknowledged the elephant in the room, never apologized or asked if I was okay with how things had unfolded. The silence around our family's betrayal was deafening. Ryan started his MBA program in the fall of 2019, using my college fund to pay his tuition. I tried not to think about it, but the knowledge sat in my chest like a stone. Every time I dragged myself out of bed at 5 in the morning to open the coffee shop, every time I ate ramen noodles for dinner because I was saving money, every time I fell asleep exhausted without energy to do anything else, I thought about Ryan in his dorm room or apartment in Chicago, living the life that my money was funding. But something unexpected happened during those grueling months. The tech startup where I worked afternoons began giving me more responsibilities. The founder, a woman named Patricia who was in her mid-40s, noticed that I was fast, accurate, and genuinely interested in understanding the business. She started teaching me about their software, about customer relationship management, about the basics of running a technology company. I absorbed everything like a sponge, staying late to learn new systems, volunteering for projects nobody else wanted. By December 2019, Patricia offered me a full-time position as a junior operations coordinator. The salary was $38,000 a year. Not much, but nearly double what I had been making at both jobs combined. I quit the coffee shop and threw myself into this new opportunity. I was still living in that depressing studio apartment, still eating cheap food and avoiding unnecessary expenses, but now I had a career path, something that felt like forward momentum. I spent my evenings teaching myself additional skills. I took free online courses in project management, data analysis, and business operations. I read books about entrepreneurship and success stories of people who had built something from nothing. I was angry still. The betrayal burned inside me constantly, but I channeled that anger into fuel. Every achievement, every new skill, every dollar saved felt like proof that my parents had been wrong about their priorities. By mid-2020, when the pandemic hit and everything went remote, I had been promoted to operations manager. My salary jumped to $55,000. While the world was falling apart and people were losing jobs, I was thriving. The company pivoted to serving remote businesses, and my ability to manage systems and workflows became even more valuable. I worked 12-hour days from my studio apartment, my laptop balanced on that thrift store table, building something meaningful. I moved to a better apartment in late 2020, a one-bedroom place in a safer neighborhood with actual furniture and working appliances. I started investing a portion of every paycheck, learning about index funds and retirement accounts and building wealth. By my 20th birthday in July 2021, I had saved $40,000, almost exactly the amount that had been in my college fund. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I had rebuilt what was taken entirely on my own. My parents and I barely spoke during this time. They would occasionally reach out on holidays or birthdays, surface-level conversations that felt hollow. Ryan graduated with his MBA in spring 2021 and got a job at a consulting firm in Chicago making $70,000 a year. My parents were so proud, posting on social media about his achievement, throwing him a celebration party. Nobody mentioned that I had financed his degree. Nobody acknowledged that while he was studying, I was working 60-hour weeks and living in poverty to survive. The resentment could have destroyed me. Some days it almost did. But I made a conscious choice to use it differently. Every time I felt angry about what they had done, I worked harder. Every time I felt sorry for myself, I learned a new skill. Every time I wanted to give up, I reminded myself that success would be the best response to their betrayal. I didn't want their apology anymore. I wanted to prove that their judgment had been catastrophically wrong. By early 2022, I had been promoted again to Director of Operations. My salary was $85,000 and I was managing a team of 8 people. At 22 years old, I was earning more than my father had ever made. The kid they had sacrificed for Ryan's future was outpacing both of them. And I was just getting started. The opportunity that would change everything came in March 2023. Patricia called me into her office on a Wednesday afternoon with news that caught me completely off guard. A larger tech company wanted to acquire our startup for $12 million. As one of the early key employees who had helped build the operations infrastructure, I would receive a payout of $250,000 as part of the acquisition deal. I was 22 years old, and suddenly I had more money than I had ever imagined possessing. The payout hit my bank account in May 2023, and I sat in my apartment staring at the balance for a solid hour. $250,000. 4 years ago, my parents had taken $43,000 from me and left me with nothing. Now I had nearly 6 times that amount, earned entirely through my own effort and determination. The irony was almost poetic. I had not only recovered from their betrayal, I had surpassed anything they could have imagined for me. I stayed with the company after the acquisition, transitioning into a senior leadership role with the new organization. My salary jumped to $120,000, and I received stock options that would be worth even more if the company continued to grow. I was building wealth at a rate that seemed impossible just a few years earlier. I moved into a luxury apartment in a trendy Detroit neighborhood, the kind of place with a doorman and rooftop terrace and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. My relationship with my parents remained distant and strained. We saw each other maybe twice a year at most, Thanksgiving and Christmas, obligatory appearances where we made polite conversation and avoided discussing anything meaningful. Ryan had moved back to Detroit after 2 years in Chicago, taking a job at an automotive company. He was doing fine, earning a decent salary but nothing extraordinary. The MBA from Northwestern had not transformed him into the business superstar my parents had hoped for. He was just another middle manager grinding away at a corporation. Then in August 2023, I received a phone call from my mother that would set everything in motion. Her voice was tight with stress and she asked if we could meet for coffee. Something in her tone told me this was serious. We met at a cafe near their house and she looked older than I remembered, more worn down. She told me that my father had been laid off from his job 6 months earlier and had been struggling to find new employment at 58 years old. They had been burning through their savings to cover the mortgage and expenses, and they were now 3 months behind on their house payments. The house. The same house where I had sat at that kitchen table 4 years earlier and learned my entire future had been sacrificed for my brother's benefit. The same house I had walked out of with a backpack swearing I would never need them again. My mother explained that they were facing foreclosure if they couldn't catch up on the payments, which totaled about $22,000. She asked with obvious difficulty and shame if I could help them. I sat there listening to her, watching her hands shake as she held her coffee cup, and I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. They had made their choice 4 years ago, and now they were facing the consequences of their financial decisions. Part of me felt sad seeing my mother so desperate and afraid. And part of me, the part that had been waiting for this moment, saw an opportunity. I told her I needed time to think about it. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and thanked me for even considering it. Over the next few days I researched the situation thoroughly. I looked up public records on their property, checked the mortgage details and calculated the numbers. The house was worth approximately $320,000. They still owed $180,000 on the mortgage. With the missed payments and late fees, they were about to lose everything. An idea formed in my mind, audacious and somewhat ruthless but perfectly legal. I called my mother back and made an offer. I would buy the house from them. Not help them save it, actually purchase it. I would pay off their entire mortgage, give them an additional $50,000 for their equity, and the house would become mine. In total, I would pay them $230,000, which would clear their debt and give them enough money to rent an apartment and get back on their feet. They could even stay in the house temporarily while they found a new place, paying me reasonable rent. My mother was silent on the phone for a long moment. I could hear her breathing, processing what I was proposing. Finally, she said she would need to discuss it with my father. 2 days later, they accepted. What choice did they have? Foreclosure would destroy their credit and leave them with nothing. At least this way they would walk away with some money and avoid complete financial ruin. The closing happened in September 2023, exactly 4 years and 3 months after they had taken my college fund. I sat in a lawyer's office signing papers that transferred ownership of my childhood home to me. My parents sat across the table, their faces a mixture of gratitude, humiliation, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Maybe regret. Maybe resentment. My father could barely look at me. My mother kept thanking me, her voice cracking with emotion, telling me I was saving their lives. Ryan was notably absent from this transaction. He had been invited to contribute to help save our parents' house, but he claimed he didn't have the money. The MBA they had sacrificed my future for had not made him wealthy enough or generous enough to help them in their crisis. I found that detail particularly satisfying. I gave them 60 days to find a new place and move out. I wasn't cruel about it. I helped them look for apartments, gave them flexibility on timing, even paid for their moving truck. But the power dynamic had completely reversed. The house that had once represented their authority and control over my life was now mine. The parents who had decided my college fund was less important than my brother's graduate school were now tenants in property I owned. The night they moved out, I stood in the empty house surrounded by the echoes of my childhood. This was where I had done homework at the kitchen table, where I had celebrated birthdays and holidays, where I had received my acceptance letter to U of M, and where I had learned that love and support were conditional. Now it belonged to me. The months following the purchase were strange and complicated. I owned my childhood home, but I didn't move into it immediately. Instead, I hired contractors to renovate it completely. New kitchen, updated bathrooms, modern flooring, fresh paint throughout. I was erasing the old memories and creating something new, something that belonged entirely to me. The house became a project, a symbol of how far I had come and what I had overcome. My parents moved into a 2-bedroom apartment about 15 minutes away. It was smaller than the house, less prestigious, but comfortable and within their budget now that they had the money from the sale. My father eventually found work as a consultant, making less than he had before but enough to contribute. My mother continued working as an administrative assistant. They were managing, surviving, but their lifestyle had downsized considerably. The contrast between their situation and mine was stark and impossible to ignore. Our family gatherings that first year after the purchase were awkward and tense. Thanksgiving 2023 was particularly uncomfortable. We met at a restaurant, neutral territory, and sat around the table making forced conversation. Ryan talked about his job, complained about his boss, mentioned he was looking for something better. My parents asked polite questions about my work, carefully avoiding any discussion of the house or the circumstances that had led to my ownership of it. Nobody mentioned the college fund. Nobody acknowledged the elephant sitting at the table with us. But something was shifting inside me during those months. The victory I had achieved, buying their house, proving them wrong, succeeding beyond their expectations, felt increasingly hollow. Yes, I had justice in a sense. Yes, I had demonstrated that their decision to prioritize Ryan over me had been a mistake. But the anger that had fueled me for 4 years was starting to burn out, leaving behind something more complicated. I realized that holding on to resentment was exhausting, and that my success meant nothing if it only served as a weapon against my family. In February 2024, my mother asked if we could have lunch together, just the two of us. We met at the same cafe where she had asked for help 6 months earlier. She looked different this time, calmer, more centered. She told me she had been going to therapy, working through her own guilt and shame about what had happened 4 years ago. She said she wanted to apologize, really apologize for the decision they had made regarding my college fund. She explained that at the time, they had genuinely believed they were making the right choice. Ryan had been struggling so much, and they were terrified he would never find success without this opportunity. They thought I was strong enough, capable enough that I would figure things out regardless. They hadn't understood how much their decision would hurt me, how deeply it would feel like betrayal and abandonment. She told me they had been wrong, that watching me struggle and distance myself had been one of the hardest experiences of her life, and that she took full responsibility for the damage they had caused to our relationship. I sat there listening, watching tears run down her face, and I felt my anger finally begin to dissolve. Her apology didn't erase what had happened or make the last 4 years any easier. But it acknowledged the pain, validated my feelings, and opened a door I hadn't realized I wanted opened. I told her that I had spent years waiting to hear those words, and that while forgiveness wouldn't happen overnight, I was willing to try rebuilding our relationship on more honest terms. Over the following months, things slowly improved between us. My father also apologized, though his version was more awkward and stilted. He admitted he had been too focused on Ryan's immediate crisis and hadn't considered the long-term impact on me or our family. We started having regular dinners together, just the three of us initially, then eventually including Ryan. The conversations were genuine now, less performative. We talked about the past honestly, acknowledged the hurt, and began creating new memories that weren't weighed down by resentment. Ryan and I had a separate conversation that spring. He told me he had always felt guilty about the college fund situation, that he had known it was wrong but had been too selfish and desperate to refuse the money. He said watching me succeed while he struggled to find meaning in his career had been humbling and painful. He asked for my forgiveness and I gave it to him. Not because what happened was okay, but because holding on to anger toward my brother wasn't serving either of us. We would never be as close as we might have been, but we could at least be civil, maybe even friendly. In June 2024, the renovations on the house were finally complete. I decided not to live in it myself. Too many ghosts, too much history. Instead, I rented it to a young family with 2 children who reminded me of what my own family might have been in better times. The rental income covered the remaining mortgage and provided additional investment capital. The house that had once represented my parents' betrayal now represented my financial independence and future security. I also made a decision that surprised even me. I started a scholarship fund for students from low-income families in the Detroit area who wanted to pursue college but lacked financial support. I seeded it with $50,000 initially, with plans to contribute more each year. The fund was named after my grandmother, who had contributed to my original college fund and who had always believed in me. In a way, I was taking the pain of what had been taken from me and transforming it into opportunity for others. By the time 2024 ended, I was 23 years old with a net worth approaching $500,000, a thriving career, and a family I was cautiously rebuilding relationships with. The journey from that devastating day in June 2019 to this moment had been brutal and transforming. I had learned that betrayal could either destroy you or forge you into something stronger, and I had chosen strength. I had learned that success was the best response to doubt, but that revenge alone couldn't fill the emptiness left by broken relationships. Looking back now, I understand that my parents made a terrible choice driven by fear and desperation. They weren't villains. They were flawed people who made a mistake with devastating consequences. Ryan wasn't my enemy. He was my brother who had been handed an opportunity and took it, just as most people would. And I wasn't a victim anymore. I was someone who had taken the worst moment of my life and used it as fuel to build something meaningful. The house sits in that suburban Detroit neighborhood, looking better than it ever did when I lived there as a child. Sometimes I drive past it, watching the new family come and go, their children playing in the yard where I once played. It doesn't hurt anymore to see it. It's just a house now, a piece of property that generates income and represents how far I've traveled. My college fund was taken from me 4 years ago, and yes, I bought their house. But the real victory wasn't in that transaction. It was in discovering that I didn't need their money or their validation to succeed. It was in learning that I could build a life entirely on my own terms, and that forgiveness wasn't weakness but rather the final step in freeing myself from the past. The betrayal shaped me, hardened me, taught me resilience and self-reliance. But it doesn't define me anymore. I define myself now, and that makes all the difference.